Welcome to part 2 of my travelog, A Dane in New York. We took the subway up to Midtown the next morning, more specifically to Grand Central Station, to show my daughter. She didn't remember it from last time. It must be one of the most beautiful stations in the world and looks more like a museum than a place where trains pass through. It was Good Friday, and a peaceful demonstration of sorts was underway outside the station, commemorating the suffering of Jesus. We headed over to Fifth Avenue for our appointment at the Empire State Building. A lovely viewer had contacted me to say that she had an office in the building. Would we like her to get tickets for the observation deck and maybe see her office on the 43rd floor? I couldn't believe her kindness, and of course I jumped at the chance. We texted back and forth and met outside the building. She was delightful and promptly and efficiently led us past the long line, through security, and gave us passes to head up to the observation deck. It was amazing seeing the city from up there, although my fear of heights was triggered big time. Last time I didn't have the courage to go up. This time, thanks to Beata, I did. It became increasingly difficult to top the experiences we'd had, and so we didn't try. We walked over to Chelsea, visited a mall for some reason, and walked on the High Line through Chelsea, which Beata had recommended. It seemed as if everybody had been recommended the High Line that day, and no wonder. Although it's very long and narrow, it's officially a park, from Hudson Yards, where we began, through Chelsea and down to the meatpacking district. It's built on an old freight rail line and is elevated above the streets, with lots of interesting modern architecture lining it along the way. The meatpacking district had changed a bit since our first time, looking cleaner and more renovated. The first time we were there, we were interviewed by a local radio or TV station, and were asked what we thought of gay marriage. Well, we're from Denmark, we said. Same-sex unions were made legal back in 1989 in Denmark. With the Registered Partnerships Act, we feel everyone should be allowed to love who they want, and get married for that matter. The Netherlands was the country that first legalized same-sex marriage, Denmark following suit only the year after the state of New York, which legalized it in June 2011. Only 2 months after our interview, as it happens. Coincidence? I think not. We walked over to the village again, and I found another snack from my teenage years and felt unreasonably happy about it. This is me being happy at having just found the Three Musketeers. I also came to the conclusion that my favorite street in New York may be Bleecker Street. We found another tiny yarn store, but again I didn't buy anything. Almost every day we spent some time looking for a street that we vaguely remembered from last time. I had bought my favorite ever jeans there, and seen John Turturro. But I gradually came to the conclusion that stores must have come and gone because we couldn't seem to find that street. We hung out in the village and later went to our now favorite Mexican restaurant again. I wanted to join the group of people sitting behind us, as did my daughter. I had previously noticed a huge Barnes & Noble on Union Square, but always felt a bit guilty about dragging my family to bookstores, and now yarn stores too. So on our way back to our hotel that night, I went by myself, to give everybody a better time. I felt the same giddiness that I felt countless times when walking into Waterstones on Piccadilly in London, and this store was the same size. I walked away with only 3 books, and felt very adult about it. The next day was dedicated to Brooklyn. I had been there once before with a group of students, but not with my family, and only in one part of it. We had 2 particular destinations in mind this time round, and we wanted to get there by walking on the Brooklyn Bridge. Everyone had apparently had the same idea as us that day, and the bridge was downright crowded. I bought a cap, which may explain why I look a tad jaunty here. Or else it was the whole walking across the Brooklyn Bridge thing. We had taken the subway to the station closest to the bridge, and I found myself appreciating the New York subway much more than last time. Last time we didn't take the subway much because our youngest daughter was only 5, and it seemed a bit run down compared to the London Tube. Or maybe we were just unlucky with the stations we went to, because this time it was fine. And it made traveling from one part of Manhattan to another, and around Brooklyn, so much easier. We first went to the area called Dumbo for a photo op, which everybody else seemed to do as well. There was a second-hand market underway, and I saw Norwegian knitwear, somewhat surprisingly. We walked around aimlessly for a while and realized that our first destination, Williamsburg, was too far away for us to walk to, but we couldn't find a cab or a subway station. When we finally did find a cab, we had no address to give the driver, and were let out on a random street when I said, "Just stop here," while looking at Google Maps and out the window. It turned out to be the perfect street for what we wanted to explore, namely the Hasidic Jewish community in Brooklyn. Suddenly, many signs were in Yiddish, and gradually the demographic of the people walking the streets changed. There were us, and then there were the Orthodox Jews. A disclaimer here. In no way is this meant to be sensational or in any way disrespectful, rather the opposite. We wanted to see and to show our daughter how differently people can live within one city, and we did. It was like stepping into another world, away from New York City and back in time. It seemed quiet and peaceful. Amazingly, the area seemed untouched by big capital. We couldn't believe Times Square and the rest of Manhattan was only a few subway stops away. It was also possibly the most interesting experience we had all week, and we all felt very grateful for it. Just as suddenly the atmosphere changed again. There were more people about, none of them Jews. And before we knew it, we sat down in a vegan cafe to have lunch. I filmed my second bathroom that week, this one with more of a Frida Kahlo vibe. My partner bought a shirt in a cool men's store that was more of a haberdashery. We tried to find a subway for our second destination, but had to take a bus between 3 stops. Third kind of vehicle that day. We finally found the real subway, hopped on and got out on Carroll Street, which was situated in a charming, leafy, laid-back area. I remembered a really nice restaurant in Brooklyn I'd been to the last time, where the chef said that they paid half the rent of a similar restaurant in Manhattan. The destination that had prompted this particular subway ride was Brooklyn General Store, a yarn store. It took us through an area of Brooklyn that I soon realized I could easily live in. I remembered Miranda and Steve from Sex and the City, who moved to Brooklyn, sparking a kind of shocked reaction from her friends. I suspect that the shocked reaction part is partly out of date now. The yarn store was amazing, but I think I'll talk a little more about it and my purchases in a separate knitting video. Suffice it to say that this time I did buy something, and could have spent another hour in there if it hadn't been for my family. We bought ice cream from an ice cream van and sat around near a school before heading back. I remembered a novel I'd read by Colm Tóibín about Brooklyn, and another, older novel by American writer Chaim Potok about the friendship between 2 boys, one of whom is a Hasidic Jew, which was my favorite novel for years when I read it. On our last full day, we found a cozy restaurant where we had brunch, and a chat with an elderly gentleman, Arthur, who was from Queens and who had traveled to many places around the world. He was going to see the Easter parade, he told us. He had done so since he was young. I love those random conversations you sometimes have when you're traveling. Then we headed uptown again to the Metropolitan, and this time it was open. And in case you're wondering, it's true what the song says. It really is the city that never sleeps. Sometimes its visitors don't either. It seemed a bit pointless to record much in the museum. Where would I begin? We got lost a number of times because it's so huge. And after a week in New York, we almost couldn't take any more in. But we so enjoyed it and managed to see most of it, zooming in on a few pieces here and there. One by American artist Charles Carroll Coleman, one by the famous Dutch artist Johannes Vermeer, and one by a Danish artist Wilhelm Hammershøi that formed part of a temporary Danish exhibition. Like the Louvre in Paris or the Museum Glyptoteket in Copenhagen, the building itself is beautiful and worth a visit. We finished with a much-needed cup of coffee under the vaulted ceiling. Back outside, we walked down Fifth Avenue. It was Easter Sunday. The weather was glorious, and lots of people were milling about. There had been that parade, the theme being funny or unusual hats. We saw the remnants of it, and people walking in the middle of Fifth Avenue. I looked for Arthur, but of course I didn't see him. There was still a crowd in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral, but we were experiencing a kind of sensory overload by now, and just ambled past it all, until we found a subway station and headed back, to stock up for a trip home the following day, and to pack. Our last proper meal was, fittingly, a burger. We spent the last morning idly strolling around the East and West Village. We were relieved we weren't walking up to Penn Station to head to Newark this time, but instead had ordered a cab. It was perfect for the tired travelers. We took in the city one last time as we were driven through it, grateful to have been able to visit it. Till we meet again, New York, it's been grand.